Hey guys, welcome back to another Train Like a King podcast episode. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about my first experience as a steersman in a six-man, outrigger canoe six-man, my first proper distance race. I mean, I've steered in the past before, but this was my first time steering, and also a little bit of a recap of the race itself, so the M2M race here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So the M2M is a six-man race here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Obviously, the title of this race has kind of been stolen from the more infamous M2M in Hawaii, which is Maui to Molokai. But here we have Maketu to the Mount Maunganui, Maketu to the Mount, which is approximately 32 kilometers from Pilot Bay to Maketu. Hence, it's called M2M. This race is run by Paul Roosendahl himself, and I joined Paul and his team Butties as they needed a replacement paddler, and I gave them one condition. I'd paddle with them if I could steer. Now, they weren't too against this. Weren't sponsored by coffee by Train Like a King. They weren't too against the idea, and I like to think that maybe my experience in the V1 rudderless helped them, overcome the fear of me being on the back in the seat 6. So for those of you, I'm pretty sure everyone listening to this podcast is obviously knows the role of a steersman. Obviously, there's 6 people in a canoe. The steersman sits at the back because that's the easiest place to keep the canoe under control, to rudder, to do draw strokes, angle strokes, and such. Now, typically, I would say that there is the common thought that a steersman should be light, and that a steersman, I think that's the most common thought, is that a steersman should be light because, hey, if they're ruddering, and they're not paddling, then you want that person to be as light as possible. But I think over the last couple of years, that's kind of starting to be proven not always true. Now, I have a few ideas as well. So a good example is Kevin Seron Jerusalemi, who started his team, moved back to Huahine after paddling for Shell, EDT, all these big teams in the mainland of Tahiti for years and years. He's always been typically a seat 3 or 4, powerhouse. They usually put the heavier paddlers, stronger paddlers into 3 and 4, which is good as well. However, when Kevin moved back to Huahine, he hopped back in seat 6 because his team was full of inexperienced paddlers. I think they were soccer players, most of them. And he trained them up, but he was obviously the one with the experience of the water, surf, and his V1 experience is phenomenal. And his dad was a champion steersman too. So he knows what to do. And so he put himself back there and hasn't left that seat since. And they've had top 10 finishes, I think maybe even top 5 finishes in the Hawaii Kinui against some of these top teams. They're just the local club team. Now it's food for thought, did he break the idea that a steersman needs to be light and so forth? It's obvious that that's not necessarily true, but it does. I guess it does depend on the overall crew that you have. Now, you wouldn't want super heavy 5 and 6 if your first 4 paddlers are sub 70 kilos, then there's probably going to be some impact on the nose, dropping in. However, here's a quick and here's a really good question that I have, and I've been asking myself lately, is that what do you do in an OC1 or a V1? What do you do when you catch a significant wave? The first thing that most people tend to do when it's a really big wave is they sit up or they lean back. Now, that's putting the weight to the tail. Does the six-man have a similar thing happening when it's on a very significant wave? I think most people have always believed that the weight should be at the front. Now, this is something that I think that should also be looked into a little bit more. You know, when you get to big swells in Tahiti and Hawaii, like, is it really important to be nose diving? Or is it kind of important to keep the nose lighter and drier and take the long run, long swell? Who knows? Just food for thought. You know, so it may not be the worst idea that the weight is in the back. So yeah. Anyway, getting back on track. Basically, filled in a seat for the Buti boys, and the race itself had some good lineups with Team Vakamanu put a team in. I think they were a little bit unsure leading up to it, but it was cool to see them, you know, have a team there after their performance at Nationals. There was Piniola came down. They were also looking for a seat. You know, not going to mention that they were scouting me as well for the race. But, you know, the steering option was pretty, with the Butties, was pretty, you know, I wanted to tick that off my list. So that was the go there. Makoha, Mitch and JB and the boys, they got a good thing going. They were there. Turanga Waiwai. It was, you know, it's not a massive field. Like, there's not heaps of numbers of crews, but it's a cool race, and there was good showing from the teams that were there. So it was awesome, and it was exciting. You know, you weren't really sure what was going to happen, especially us with the, you know, I wasn't the only, I would say, wild card in terms of where I was sitting, but, you know, we had Big Narada up at 1. We had Ash, who usually sits at 1, was back in 4. So he enjoyed that. You had Paul, who usually steering, up in 3, calling. You know, so there's a bit of an unorthodox selection there. But yeah, it worked out well in the end, because basically the wind was coming from the left and it was a little bit offshore. So people were scared of taking a wider line. And so a lot of the teams actually went close to the shoreline to kind of negate the thought of the wind pushing you too far out. There was also the current was, high tide was at 1, so sometime during the race the current was going to start going out, and you wanted to be close to the shoreline to negate the effects of the current. You know, if you're wide out, then you'll be working against the current. So I knew that you could be wide up until the last hour, basically, or if anything, it was going to be slack. So I knew we still had time to do the wide line. Just wasn't sure, you know, how well that wind was going to be. But it worked out fine. The wind dropped halfway, and then, you know, although we were on the wider line, there was still swells wrapping in. And that's the thing with a coastline like this, is that even if the wind is blowing out away from it, if there's swell out there or there's bump or whatever, everything tends to kind of want to wrap back in to the shallow, from deep to shallow, you know. So we kind of worked with the wind and swell that kind of took us out to the wider line. I always felt like I was heading straight, though. and if anything, everyone was working off run line and going left. I felt like I was going straight. I probably did get pushed a little bit higher than run line, but like I said, halfway when that wind died, the swell and everything just lined up straight for Rabbit Island, and it gave me choices too. Normally, I was in a position to carry on going to the right of Rabbits because of how wide I was. However, I chose to go with the swell, and I had the opportunity to go inside Rabbits. And going inside Rabbits also went hand in hand with just covering Peniola, because Peniola were still, thereabouts. And if I went on the right-hand side of Rabbits, I would have been a little bit more like precautionary. It was a little bit more of a risk because Peniola could have really gone for a push, knowing that we went out on the outside, and they could have made up some significant ground there. Now, if you were an inside the line team and then you chose to go outside Rabbits, I probably wouldn't say, judging on the swell and bump direction, probably wasn't your best bet, because then you're just working angles that aren't in your favor. If you're already inside there, then no point racking up more distance going around Rabbits. Just shortest distance sometimes, always wins. And coming around the mountain was really fun because, thankfully I've done that so many times, and every time you make a hard turn around a rock, there's always some swell that comes through. And I feel like we just ran that really well and picked up on, there were just surges there. It was pretty awesome. I haven't even talked about steering yet. So how was it actually steering for the first time? So with this side wind coming from the left, I knew that it was going to take a strain on the left arm. Now, for some reason that week, I think I did a lot of paddling on the erg, and so my arm and shoulder was already a little bit jacked up. So before the race had started, I was getting my wife to put liniment, so deep heat, on my left arm and left shoulder, scapula, and all that, just to get it loose and warmed up. Only on the left hand side too, which was funny. But ended up using this really good stuff that Tyler's team uses, and no joke, it was still hot at the end of the race. 3 hours later, 2.5 hours later, it was still burning at the end. So that was good stuff. But a lot of paddling on the left hand side, a lot of draw strokes on the left hand side. I didn't, for the first 20 minutes or so, I was pretty reserved on how many times I would rudder on the right hand side. I wanted to try and paddle steer as much as possible. So I probably would say that it worked out okay. But, if I had the chance, maybe I would poke a little bit more, but who knows? It definitely it uses a lot of different muscles, and just the isometric holds as well at times is a different kind of, causes a different kind of fatigue that I'm used to, but it's ultimately is good because I think it being a steersman would help your rudderless paddling a lot, because it trains those angle strokes and the draws, and it's just, it's not just front to back, it's everything in between. And then there's also just the mind of the focus, what you're focusing on, the waves, and it's the steersman it's hard, but it's harder in a different way. It's not just like cardio and outright work. You get fatigued with those isometric holds, and when you get to paddle, you get to push, but then you kind of push. You have to go through moments of like contributing to the push at the right time. Boop, 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 now, and then taking a step back and making sure that the canoe is staying on the wave. It's in the right direction. So it's a little bit more like intervals. You go and then steer, correct. Go, steer, correct. Now, in my opinion, especially if there's bump involved or surf, the good steersman will contribute when they need to, and then make their corrections and rudders when the canoe is up to speed or riding something, like it's on something. If you're doing the opposite, and let's say your captain or whoever's calling the pushes calls the push at a time that you're not ready to contribute to the team, and you during the push you put a uni in or a draw and you're not contributing, or you haven't lined the canoe up correctly, then if that's out of sync, then you're just going to be pushing for nothing and maybe not actually catching anything. That's what I've kind of noticed, is that like and I always knew this, like I was told back when I was with Paddling Connection that the captain needs to be in sync with the steersman and the steersman needs to be in sync with the captain. So, I have a lot of experience being in seat 3 and 4 and calling bumps and trying to think of what the steersman is doing. And however, it was pretty cool to be in the opposite seat. And I think Paul agreed, because he's used to steering and he kind of knew what I wanted to go for. So he was calling well. And it would have been cool for the surf to be a little bit bigger. Coffee break. A little bit bigger, because then I could, really experience what it's like to keep the 6-man locked into a big wave. There were moments where I noticed like, whoa, yeah, this is important to be here right now in a steering position rather than contributing paddling wise, because I'm basically preventing the 6-man from spinning out off that way, and we lose the speed. It's the same as the OC1. However, here's where I find it a little bit funny for certain steerers. So, and especially if the conditions aren't massive and the wave that you're on is massive, I have I kind of have a hard idea. I have a problem with watching steersmen go from like a right-hand rudder to an immediate left rudder. Like, I don't know. So I guess there's definitely cases for it, especially if it's big surf and legit, you're just carrying momentum. But if it's relatively like calm and flat and there's not a lot, like you should be ruddering and then contributing, ruddering, then contributing. Because let's say you're on the right-hand side, you pull a right to go you put a right side rudder to make the canoe go to the right. And then all of a sudden you want to go left and you come all the way onto the left-hand side to rudder to go left. You haven't contributed to any of the forward momentum. If you were just to rudder to go right and then start paddling on the right-hand side, there's a chance that the canoe's going to go left anyway, So I just crack up. If there's a steersman back there doing the double or even doing the triple, rudder, in relatively calm conditions. Yeah, I don't know. But that's just my thoughts anyway. So that was one of my goals, is to not do that. I was trying to getting into the rhythm of like rudder and then pedal, rudder, pedal. Early on, I was doing the draw, pedal, pedal. But that took its toll. It was amazing the fatigue that you get in the arms when that happens. And for a couple of strokes there, you're just filled with lactic acid and you're like, oh, I can't keep that up for too long. And I imagine the bigger the surf gets, the more important those rudders become. But yeah, overall it was pretty good experience. Enjoyed it being back there, and yeah, we were in the mahi, and just the weight of the mahi and the shape of the mahi, I think in a side wind like that holds its line a little bit better compared to the lighter puakea designs. I know that there's a lot more willingness for the puakea to blow around, and that's another question: is does the weight in the back of a puakea, putting the weight further back, minimize how much of that wiggle or occurs? Now, for example, when the wind blows, the wind usually impacts the tail, especially in the V1 or whatever. Like its first influence is on the tail. So if you're putting more weight in the tail, does that minimize how much blowing around happens? I don't know. You got to weigh that up though with how much of this is happening. You don't want the tail to the nose to be lifted too much, because you're going to be like doing this, but yeah, just food for thought. Yeah, anyway, just what else happened? Peniula hit a rock coming around the mount. Yeah, a bit unlucky there. Yeah, there's lots of little surprising rocks that pop up there, and yeah, they hit the rock and gave Manukau a chance of getting a bit closer and being in contention in the last 500 meters. He had a bit of a sprint off, which is always tough after 32 kilometers of racing, hard racing. I know they were neck to neck a lot of the times throughout that race. And then Orake boys, they came in fourth place. Funny story they were telling me is that they didn't actually see us in the lead because we were so wide out, and they actually the whole time thought they were in podium finishing spot until they arrived and then seen us standing on the bank, which was pretty funny. That was a funny story. So but yeah, big ups to them because not only to be super successful in the sprints, they've improved heaps in the distance stuff too. And I've always talked about hand in hand distance paddling makes you a better sprinter. And because it's predominantly aerobic. I've had podcasts about that, VO2 max threshold stuff. That yeah, distance is good for sprints. Look at the likes of Maketu and Mion and Kevin and them. They're all super distance athletes, but it's just as good for the sprints. Maybe if there was a 50 meter or 100 meter race, things would change there, but 200 meter like the Olympic racing, but yeah, until that happens, it's still a predominantly aerobic sport, except for the 6-man stuff. 6-man, being a heavier canoe, there's that element of power. And also the 6-mans are faster overall time. So you're moving closer to that anaerobic and power driven performance. But yeah, I mean, looking forward to getting back into 6-man paddling with my own club, Herbert's on Tour. Missed them that weekend. Would have been awesome to have them down, but it was still cool to get a training running with her anyway. So that's all for this podcast. Few updates. So the next podcast, I think the next podcast that's coming is going to be a AMA. So ask me anything. So I'll just be answering questions that you all give me. So I've accumulated questions from the past, or thanks to Alicia, she's accumulated a lot of the questions from the past. But I've also put a poll up on my Instagram today Hope you guys see it. So chuck your questions in there, and I'll answer them in the next podcast. And paddles, the three designs that we have: the Pounamu green, the Pounamu pink, and the red. The the red design that we have too. We've got the new samples, and they are looking amazing. The Ariki collection. So stay tuned for one of those, because they're looking really good. And if you're keen on one of those, then buy one. Support the Thai TK collaboration. Check out the training plans. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube, go there, subscribe here on Spotify or Apple Podcast. Leave us a review or a comment. It all helps. Trying to push the content. And what I've noticed is, not to worry too much about the quality, but just getting some consistency with the quantity of content that's getting out to you guys. I mean, I'm a content consumer myself. I listen to a lot of audio podcasts, Spotify podcasts, and watch a lot of YouTube stuff. And it's not necessarily the high quality stuff that's important. It's just like, as long as the audio is decent, I just enjoy listening. So, thank you guys for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one. Ciao.